October 17th, 1935, Nashville, Tennessee. Morning arrives. In the Cheekwood estate's master bedroom, a heavy, unnatural silence stands. Cold autumn light filters through thick curtains, illuminating a massive redwood bed and the figure of a man taking his last breath. Leslie Cheek Sr. is dying. He's only 61 years old. What surrounds him isn't just a bedroom. This is a room designed with mathematical precision to inspire awe. The walls are paneled with panels removed from an 18th century English estate. The fireplace is carved from marble that British monarchs once gazed upon. Yet now, all this imported history, all this luxury collected piece by piece across the ocean, becomes meaningless scenery. The doctor records the time of death. One of America's most expensive private homes owner is dead. This is cruelest irony's moment. Leslie Cheek spent years planning this castle. He poured his soul, nerves, and astronomical sums of money into it. Yet he lived here exactly 2 years, only 24 months. The house that was supposed to become the Cheek family's eternal triumph symbol instantly turned into the United States' most luxurious mausoleum. Downstairs in the vast hall, servants begin covering the mirrors. One of them is especially huge, a gilded frame several meters high. According to family documents, it was because of this mirror that this house was built. Yet now it reflects only emptiness. Beyond the wrought iron gates of the estate, far below stretches another reality. It's 1935. America is on its knees. The Great Depression has destroyed the middle class. People in cities stand in free soup lines. Unemployment reaches 20%. Farmers are losing their lands. And here atop a wooded hill stands a palace whose construction cost $2.5 million of that time. To understand this figure's scale, it needs translation into comprehensible quantities. The average worker at that time earned about $1,000 yearly. Cheekwood's construction cost as much as 2,500 years of continuous labor of an ordinary person. It wasn't just a house. It was a fortress built on money that seemed endless. Where did this capital come from amid universal poverty? The answer lies not in oil and not in gold. The answer is in a simple blue tin can that stood in almost every American family's kitchen: coffee, the Maxwell House brand. Leslie Cheek was no ordinary stroke of luck. He was a man who accomplished what in financial terms is called a perfect exit. He and his family sold their business exactly 1 year before the stock market plunged into the abyss. While other magnates were jumping from Wall Street skyscraper windows, losing everything in a single day, the Cheeks sat atop a mountain of cash. They were kings of liquidity in a world of bankrupts. Yet the death in the master bedroom calls into question this success's price. Leslie Cheek built paradise on earth, yet he wasn't given time to enjoy it. His heart stopped, unable to withstand the strain. The story we're about to uncover isn't a tour of a beautiful mansion. This is ambition's anatomy. We must understand how exactly the Tennessee family turned caffeine into concrete and limestone, how they foresaw the economic crash, yet couldn't foresee their own health's collapse. This is a rise chronicle so rapid that the fall was inevitable. To unravel this, we need leaving the room with the cooling body and traveling back in time to the era when coffee was still sold in bags, not cans, and when young Leslie Cheek was just beginning understanding that real money is made not on the product, but on the brand. We're heading to the 19th century's end, to where the obsession was born that ultimately raised these walls and killed their creator. To understand how Cheekwood became possible at all, we need erasing modern Nashville from the map with its neon signs and bars. We're transported to the 19th century's end, the 1890s. The USA's South is still licking its wounds after the Civil War, yet Nashville is the exception. It's a financial cauldron, a city where the old planter aristocracy is forced to huddle under the onslaught of new hungry industrialists. At this scene's center appears Leslie Cheek. He wasn't a poor immigrant who arrived with $1 in his pocket. This isn't a Disney fairy tale.
A lovely evening, isn't it?
Leslie was born in
Please have some more.
1874 in
Thank you.
Kentucky,
This is delightful, indeed.
in a family that already understood money's language. His father was a partner in a thriving wholesale grocery firm. Leslie grew up not amid poetry, but among invoices, bills of exchange, and ledgers. By 20 years old, he was already working in the family business, C.T. Cheek and Sons. His worldview was formed right here in the dusty warehouses on the Cumberland River banks. He sees goods coming and going, sugar, flour, tobacco. Yet Leslie differs from his contemporaries in one trait. He's obsessed with efficiency. While others content themselves with resale percentages, he seeks a product that can be monopolized through quality. He isn't a dreamer, he's a calculator. And here, the second key player enters the stage, his cousin, Joel Owsley Cheek. The relationship between Leslie and Joel is a classic symbiosis example that often occurs in great capital's history. Joel was older, over 40. He was a traveling salesman, a roadman who sold coffee for a wholesale company. Yet, Joel had a fixed idea. In the 1890s, American coffee was awful. This is historical fact. Housewives bought green beans and roasted them at home on frying pans. The result was unpredictable. Over-roasted, under-roasted, bitter drink. No industrial taste standard existed. Joel Cheek was confident he could create the perfect blend, one that would be the same always in every cup. Leslie Cheek saw in this not just tasty coffee, he saw a scalable business model. If Joel was an artist mixing bean varieties, searching for perfection, Leslie was the architect of a system that could sell that perfection to millions. Leslie understood the emerging middle class's psychology. People want stability. They're willing to pay more for the guarantee that their morning will start with a predictable taste. This was a revolutionary idea for that time, selling not raw materials but a brand. The turning point comes in 1892. Joel finds his perfect blend, yet he has no name, no reputation. The cousins make a move that today would be called a brilliant marketing ploy. In Nashville's center stood the Maxwell House Hotel. It wasn't just a place to sleep. It was a luxury palace where presidents, including Theodore Roosevelt, foreign diplomats, and magnates, stayed. Dinner at Maxwell House was a quality mark. Joel Cheek approaches the hotel manager and offers his blend for free as a trial. The manager agrees. A few days later, when the trial coffee supply runs out, the hotel returns to its old supplier and a revolt occurs. The hotel guests, the South's richest and most demanding public, begin complaining about the coffee taste. They demand that very blends return. The hotel signs a contract with the Cheeks. From that moment, the coffee gets its name, Maxwell House Coffee. Leslie Cheek, observing the success, makes a strategic decision. In 1901, he, along with Joel and partner John Neal, founds the Cheek-Neal Coffee Company. Leslie becomes not just an investor, he becomes the vice president, the brain center that turns local success into national expansion. It's here that we see the Cheek strategy's first manifestation, which later will be reflected in his home's architecture. He doesn't seek being on newspaper covers. Joel travels across the country. His face is associated with the brand. Leslie sits in the office and builds logistics. He buys up shares. He reinvests profits. He builds an empire quietly, brick by brick. His philosophy is simple: control. Control over quality, control over supplies, control over capital. He despises chaos. If the market is unstable, he creates a system that stabilizes it. If coffee is a raw commodity subject to price fluctuations, he turns it into a premium product whose price is fixed by reputation. Yet, to create a true dynasty, money alone isn't enough. Status is needed. A connection to history is needed, which grocers didn't have. In 1896, parallel to the coffee revolution, an event occurs that will determine the family's aesthetic future. Leslie Cheek marries Mabel Wood. Mabel is a separate chapter. She isn't just a rich husband's wife. She comes from a lineage that carries weight. She's smart, educated, and possesses what money cannot buy: impeccable taste and knowledge of European culture. If Leslie is the engine, then Mabel is the rudder. Their union is the merger of two capitals: Leslie's financial aggression and Mabel's cultural ambitions. Together, they begin traveling. They see Europe not as tourists, but as collectors. They look at British estates not with admiration, but with an appraising gaze. Mabel teaches Leslie to see the difference between simply expensive and eternal. Leslie teaches Mabel that any dream can be turned into an estimate and paid for. By the 1920s end, the Cheek Neal Company becomes a monster. The Nashville plant operates around the clock. Plants are opened in Houston, Jacksonville, Richmond, Brooklyn, and Los Angeles. The Maxwell House can stand on tables from California to New York. By 50 years old, Leslie Cheek reaches the pinnacle. He's fantastically rich. Yet in Nashville's high society, they still look down on him slightly. For the old aristocracy, he's a coffee baron, a merchant. He has money, but no castle. He has power, but no throne. And Leslie feels it. His ambition transforms. He's no longer satisfied with simply earning money. He wants fixing his position in stone. He wants building something that will silence any critics, something that will outlive him. The social conflict here is obvious: new money against old traditions. Leslie solves this problem purely American style. He decides to buy old traditions. If he has no ancestral castle in England, he'll bring it to Tennessee in pieces, in crates. By 1928, the situation is heating up. The stock market is overheated. Everyone is playing the exchange. Yet Leslie, with his instinct for danger and hatred of uncontrolled risks, begins sensing something wrong. He sees that the bubble is about to burst. And then, at the company's peak value, he and his family receive an offer they cannot refuse. The Postum Holding, future General Foods, offers to buy Maxwell House. The deal amount is more than $40 million. This wasn't just big money. This was a small state's budget. Leslie faces a choice: stay in the game and risk everything in an unstable economy, or take the money and go into eternity. He chooses eternity. And this decision becomes the first step toward creating Cheekwood. Yet he doesn't yet know that by signing the sale documents, he's also signing a death sentence for his health. By relieving himself of empire responsibility's burden, he leaves himself only one goal: to build the house. And this goal will consume him entirely. 1928, in Manhattan lawyers' offices, documents are signed that will forever change the American elite's power balance. The Cheek family puts their signatures under the agreement to sell the Cheek-Neal Coffee Company. The buyer is the giant food conglomerate Postum Company, which later becomes known as General Foods. The deal amount is staggering, $40 million. If we adjust this amount for inflation and purchasing power today, we're talking about a fortune exceeding $500 million. This was live money, not stocks, not promises, not assets needing conversion into cash over years. This was a check that made the Cheek family instantly one of the South's richest. Yet, this event's true drama becomes clear only 12 months later. In October 1929, the New York Stock Exchange crashes. Black Tuesday arrives. Billions of dollars evaporate into thin air in a matter of hours. Banks close. Factories stop. Millionaires turn into paupers. The Great Depression covers the country with a black shroud. And now imagine Leslie Cheek's position. While the whole world around is burning in financial hell, his fortune lies intact, protected, and fixed. He sold his business at the very peak, a second before the catastrophe. This looks like divine providence or devilish luck. While his neighbors sell family jewels to buy food, Leslie Cheek becomes the owner of a resource that in deflationary conditions becomes almost omnipotent: cash. It's at this moment, against national tragedy's backdrop, that the Cheekwood estate idea is born. And paradoxically, this monumental project begins with an absurd, almost anecdotal detail. Family legend confirmed by numerous testimonies states that the true building reason for the palace was a mirror. Mabel Cheek inherited from her family a huge gilded Rococo-style mirror. It was a massive artwork, almost 3 meters high. When the spouses tried bringing it into their then Nashville home, it turned out that the ceilings were too low. The mirror simply didn't fit. Most people in such a situation would have sold the mirror or cut off its legs. Leslie Cheek did otherwise. He looked at his wife and said, _quote, _0, _. This sounds like nouveau riche whim, yet behind it lies deep psychology. The mirror became just a pretext. Leslie and Mabel needed a stage corresponding to their new status. They needed not just a house, but a strength declaration. And to create this declaration, they needed a guide, a person who could turn their money into art. This person was Bryant Fleming. Fleming wasn't an ordinary architect. He was a Cornell University professor and one of landscape architecture's pioneers in America. He belonged to that rare creator's breed who don't just draw wall plans, but design a way of life. Fleming believed that house and landscape should be a single whole, that architecture should control a person's motions passing through it. The alliance of Leslie Cheek and Bryant Fleming became that very strategic alliance that determined the estate's fate. Leslie provided an unlimited budget. Mabel provided aesthetic direction. Fleming provided the vision. In spring 1929, several months before the stock market crash, this trio boards an ocean liner and heads to England. This isn't a tourist trip. This is an expedition for trophies. At that time, the British aristocracy was experiencing its own crisis. Huge inheritance taxes and the First World War's aftermath forced dukes and earls to sell off their ancestral nests. Great English estates were being demolished or sold off in pieces. Leslie Cheek and Bryant Fleming arrived there like vultures of high culture. They traveled through the English countryside visiting crumbling castles and mansions. Fleming with his encyclopedic knowledge, pointed out the best examples. Quote one, and they took them. The purchase's scale was industrial. They bought elements of the Grosvenor House estate in London, which was going under demolition. They acquired mahogany doors that remembered British prime ministers' touches. They bought limestone balustrades, wrought iron grills, 18th century oak panels. All this was carefully dismantled, packed into huge wooden crates, and shipped across the Atlantic by ships, then by train to Tennessee. This was an unprecedented history transfer. Cheekwood wasn't supposed to become an English estate copy. It was supposed to become a reincarnation. Leslie Cheek was literally buying old houses' souls to house them in his new body of concrete and steel. Fleming designed the house in the Georgian Revival style, yet he made it purely American in its engineering essence. Beneath the 18th century facade hid a reinforced concrete frame, a technology used in building skyscrapers and bunkers. This was a house built with paranoid reliability. Leslie wanted it to stand for 1,000 years. The construction site was chosen in a 100-acre forest tract west of Nashville. It was wild, hilly terrain. Fleming saw in these hills the potential to create a dramatic effect. The house wasn't supposed to stand by the road. It was supposed to reign at the top, hidden from mere mortals' eyes, revealing itself only to those invited inside. Construction began at the moment when the U.S. economy hit bottom. This creates the sharpest social contrast. Nashville, like the whole country, was suffering from unemployment. People were losing hope. And suddenly on the hill, activity begins. Hundreds of jobs, masons, carpenters, truck drivers, electricians. Leslie Cheek, without planning it himself, became a savior for hundreds of local families. The Cheekwood construction site became a local analog of government employment programs. They paid generously and on time here. Working for the Cheeks was considered great luck. In local residents' eyes, this project, despite its outrageous luxury, received certain moral indulgence. The coffee baron was building his Versailles, yet he was feeding the city. Trucks with limestone went in a convoy. The stones were quarried right there in Tennessee, which gave the house the local land's color and texture. Yet inside these walls, treasures brought from Europe were being installed. Special attention was paid to logistics. For delivering the heaviest elements, such as solid marble fireplaces, local bridges, and roads, had to be reinforced. The train loaded with the Cheeks trophies arrived at Nashville Station like a train with conquistadors' gold. 5 freight cars stuffed to the brim with the British Empire's history, ready to become the foundation for the American coffee empire's history. By 1932, the frame was ready. The huge mansion towered over the trees, its windows looking at the valley with cold, commanding calm. Bryant Fleming created an optical illusion masterpiece. The house seemed old. The limestone was treated to look weathered. The landscape was reshaped so that it seemed as if the house had always stood there and the trees had grown around it, although in reality everything was exactly the opposite. This was strategy's triumph. Leslie Cheek converted bank accounts' ephemeral numbers into something tangible, heavy, eternal. He and Mabel were preparing to enter their new world. Yet behind grandeur's facade, the countdown timer was already ticking. The house was almost ready to receive its owners, yet the owner was already broken by the race for this grandeur. November 1932. The Cheek family moves into their new home. To understand this moment's psychology, one needs imagining the physical sensation of crossing a border. Outside, beyond the wrought iron gates, the Great Depression rages, chaos, uncertainty, dust storms in the west, and hunger marches in the east. Yet as soon as the mansion's heavy doors close behind Leslie and Mabel, the world falls silent. They enter a space where time hasn't just stopped. It has been artificially constructed. Cheekwood isn't just 36 rooms with a total area of almost 3,000 square meters. It's its owner's architectural psychoanalysis. Leslie Cheek, a man who strived for control and order all his life, built himself a stone capsule impermeable to external threats. Every detail of this house screams of the desire to stop the moment. The first thing greeting the visitor is the smell. It isn't new construction smell, not paint or varnish smell typical of fresh homes. Cheekwood smells of centuries. Thanks to those very elements brought from England, the hall air is saturated with old oak's aroma, beeswax, and cold limestone. This was an old factory illusion. A house not a day old, smelled as if 10 generations had lived in it. The central hall is designed as a theatrical stage, the floors laid with black and white marble in a checkerboard pattern, a classic Masonic order symbol, light and darkness's duality. Yet the gaze is immediately drawn to the house's main axis. There in the depth stands it, the mirror, that very item because of which, according to legend, this colossal project was undertaken. It hangs in the main living room, reflecting the light from the tall windows. The gilded frame, twisting in Rococo style, looks almost alive against the restrained walls. This mirror, almost 3 meters high, is the only element of chaos and vanity in this strict geometry kingdom. If you approach it in 1932 and look into the reflection, you would see not just your face. You would see a person who defeated the system. Leslie Cheek looked into this glass and saw his rightness's confirmation. He surrounded the fragile glass with impenetrable stone. Yet the most interesting room, revealing Leslie's character, is located slightly to the side. It's the library. It's the house's brain. The walls are paneled with pine, yet not ordinary pine, removed from an English mansion. The wood has a warm, honeyed hue that absorbs light, making the room cozy and at the same time solemn. Thousands of volumes are collected here, yet the library's main detail is hidden from view. Among the bookshelves, there's a section that's actually a door. This is a classic Gothic novel element embodied in reality. The secret door opens a narrow staircase leading straight to the master bedroom upstairs. Why does the coffee magnate need a secret passage? He isn't a spy, not a criminal. The answer lies in an introvert's psychology endowed with boundless power. This staircase is an escape path, the possibility to disappear from his own reception without saying goodbye to the guests, the possibility to control access to his body. Leslie Cheek built a house for receptions, yet left himself a loophole to become invisible at any moment. This is paranoia's architecture wrapped in aristocratic charms packaging. From the library, we enter the loggia. This space is a Bryant Fleming masterpiece. Here the boundary between inside and outside is erased. The floor is laid with tiles imitating street cobblestones. The walls are decorated with trellises along which live plants climb. In the center, a fountain spurts. In winter, when Tennessee is covered by icy rains, here is eternal summer. This is money's power demonstration over climate. In the loggia, Leslie Cheek could enjoy nature without touching its dirt and unpredictability. Nature here is sterilized, packaged, and served as decor. Yet the house's true engineering and aesthetic backbone is the main staircase, an oval staircase floating in the air. Limestone steps are embedded in the wall. This is a cantilevered construction. It has no visible supports from below. It seems that the stone defies gravity's laws. The wrought iron railings dating to the 18th century were brought from the Queen Anne estate in England. Ascending this staircase, you physically feel the ascent. Architect Fleming calculated each step's height to make a person walk slowly with dignity. It's impossible to run up this staircase. You can only process on it. This is a social programming tool. Anyone ascending to the second floor into the family's Holy of Holies involuntarily straightens their back and slows their step. The house dictates behavior. On the second floor are the bedrooms, 11 rooms for family and guests. Each has its own bathroom, an unheard-of luxury for the 1930s when most Americans still used outhouses or one bathroom for the whole family. The pipes here were hidden in half-meter-thick walls. Water flowed silently. Nothing domestic was to disturb the inhabitants' peace. Special attention should be paid to the first-floor dining room. This is a hall for rituals. The walls are covered with pictorial wallpapers depicting idealized landscapes. A huge redwood table could seat a dozen guests. Here, under crystal chandelier light, dinners took place whose menus could shame Paris's best restaurants. While food rationing was being introduced in the country, here they served oysters delivered on ice from the coast and the finest wines, even though prohibition was repealed only in 1933. Yet the house isn't just stone and wood, it's the people who serve it. Cheekwood was a machine operated by a whole battalion, gardeners, maids, cooks, chauffeurs. They moved through the house via a system of hidden corridors and service staircases so as not to cross paths with the owners unless necessary. The house was designed so that labor was invisible. Food appeared on the table, dust disappeared. Beds were made as if by magic. This was control's ultimate fantasy, a world where all needs are satisfied before they're even realized. However, walking through these halls today, knowing the story's end, it's impossible to shake off a feeling of deep melancholy. Brian Fleming created a masterpiece, yet he made it too perfect. The house turned out static. It resembled a museum even before it officially became one. There was little life in it, but much eternity. The rooms were arranged to impress, not to live in. Chairs stood where it was compositionally correct, not where it was comfortable to sit. Fireplaces were more like fire altars than warmth sources. Leslie Cheek, entering this house in November 1932, thought he was entering his reward. He believed it was the home stretch where he could rest. He didn't understand that he had built a golden cage by isolating himself from the world, from the noise, from problems. He was left alone with the most terrible enemy, from which neither limestone walls nor secret passages would save him. He was left alone with his aging body and the silence that in such vast spaces sounds deafeningly loud. Cheekwood's architecture promised immortality, yet it lied. 1935, October. Only 3 years have passed since the housewarming. 3 orbits around the sun, during which the huge limestone organism called Cheekwood took root in the Tennessee hills, while its creator conversely began to fade. Here we come to this story's cruelest paradox. Usually when people build a dream home, they visualize decades of life, how they'll age by the fireplace, how grandchildren will run through the corridors, how the garden will mature with them. Leslie Cheek built Cheekwood as a monument to his strength. Yet, as soon as the last stone was laid, his own strength began to wane. On October the 17th, 1935, Leslie Cheek's heart stopped. This wasn't a sudden catastrophe like the stock market crash. This was a slow, quiet fading in rooms with 4-meter-high ceilings. The medical report stated death from natural causes related to the heart. He was 61 years old. For a modern person, this is life's prime. For a man who went through the stress of creating a business empire and managing millions, this was the finish. The farewell scene in the mansion turned into a surreal spectacle. The house created for social receptions and triumph demonstration instantly transformed into America's most expensive funeral hall. The coffin with the coffee magnate's body stood in that very hall where the famous mirror hung. The reflection for which the walls were erected now caught only mourning veils and black suits. Leslie's death exposed Cheekwood's architecture's fundamental problem. This house was designed for a couple. It was a symphony for 2 instruments, Leslie and Mabel. Without Leslie, the house lost its strategic center. Only aesthetics remained, and here Mabel Wood Cheek steps to the forefront. Up to this moment, she had been a co-author, an inspirer, a wife. Now she was left alone in a castle almost 3,000 square meters in area. Imagine this space's psychological pressure. 36 rooms, 11 bedrooms, 12 bathrooms, and 1 widow. Mabel faced a choice that often breaks people who receive a huge inheritance. She could have sold the house, gone to Europe, closed this chapter, yet she chooses another path. She decides to bring the stone to life. It's during this period between 1935 and the 1940s that Cheekwood transforms from a rich man's house into a cultural phenomenon, and Mabel from a widow into a matriarch. She realizes that the house's interiors have become too heavy, too filled with her husband's memories, and she goes outside to the garden. If Leslie built walls, then Mabel began building the landscape. This was her therapy and her way of fighting emptiness. She didn't just plant flowers. She created living paintings. Under her leadership, the Cheekwood Gardens became so perfect that her society status changed. She stopped being just Mrs. Cheek. She became president of the Garden Club of America. This sounds like a nice hobby for a rich lady, yet don't be deceived. In the 1930s and 1940s, the Garden Club of America was one of the country's most influential women's organizations. It was a power network woven from roses and boxwood. Through this network, Mabel maintained the family's social influence even after losing her husband. She turned the estate's territory into a series of green rooms, a wisteria garden, boxwood mazes, reflecting pools. Each zone was designed to control the viewer's gaze, just as architect Fleming controlled movement inside the house. Mabel tried filling the emptiness with beauty, yet behind blooming gardens' facade hid a deep human drama. The house was becoming increasingly isolated. Down below, in ordinary people's world, a new storm was brewing. Europe, from where the Cheeks brought their treasures, was preparing for war. Hitler had already come to power. Those very English estates whose parts now adorned Cheekwood's walls would soon be turned into hospitals or bombed by the Luftwaffe. Cheekwood, at the 1930s end, resembled a beautiful drifting ship. Inside, an ideally preserved 18th century atmosphere. Outside, a world rolling toward World War II. Mabel lived in a time capsule. Servants continued setting the tables. The silver continued shining. Yet this grandeur's meaning began blurring. For whom was all this? At this story moment, the third character's voice begins sounding louder. Huldah Cheek, Leslie and Mabel's daughter. Huldah grew up in her parents' ambition's shadow. She saw how this house consumed her father's energy. She saw how her mother tried dissolving her grief in endless gardening. For Huldah, Cheekwood was less a palace than a golden cage with very high walls. By the 1940s beginning, it becomes obvious. Maintaining such a house for one person isn't a privilege but a burden. It's a full-time job. Bills for electricity, heating, salaries for a servant staff, constant limestone facade repairs. All this required colossal resources and attention. The money from Maxwell House's sale was enormous, yet it wasn't infinite. In 1943, an event occurs that can be called the house's history's second turning point. After Leslie's death, Mabel Woodcheek makes a decision that seems unthinkable for old-school aristocracy. She decides to give away the house. She hands over Cheekwood's keys to her daughter Huldah and her husband Walter Sharp. Mabel herself moves to a smaller house built on the estate grounds. This gesture is an abdication act. The Queen leaves the throne, acknowledging that the palace is too large for solitude. Yet for Huldah and Walter, this gift becomes a test. They're a modern 1940s couple. They have different tastes, a different life rhythm. They move into a house museum where every fork and every door handle screams of the previous generation's history and ambitions. Here arises the moral ambivalence that permeates this entire saga. On one hand, we see unconditional beauty and grandeur created by human genius and money. On the other hand, we see this grandeur's absolute unsuitability for real human life. Leslie Cheek wanted building a house for centuries, yet he built a decoration in which it's impossible to simply live. One can only reside. World War II changes everything. The world after 1945 becomes different. Taxes rise. The old lifestyle, implying a servant's army, dies. The aristocratic lifestyle that the Cheeks so carefully imported from England is already destroyed in England itself, and in America becomes an anachronism. Huldah and Walter Sharp live in the house, try adapting it to themselves, yet they constantly feel the pressure. The house demands sacrifices. It demands being served. They understand what Leslie didn't have time to understand. You don't own such a house. Such a house owns you. By the mid-1950s, the family faces the same question that once faced British lords whose fireplaces now stood in their living rooms. How to save the heritage if you can no longer or don't want to maintain it. History has come full circle. What began as an attempt to buy history now itself has become history needing salvation. The family's personal tragedy, the creator's early death, and the heir's loneliness prepared the ground for the last, most important transformation. They had to decide. Let Cheekwood slowly decay, turning into ruins like those that inspired its creation, or commit a radical act that would change private property's very concept. The crisis was brewing, and the decision they make will become a mirror reflection of that very strategy with which Leslie Cheek began his path. Only this time, the goal will not be profit, but memory. 1957. America, is at the zenith of its post-war euphoria. Elvis Presley has already recorded his hits just a few miles from here on Music Row. In Nashville's suburbs, typical one-story houses with lawns and televisions are sprouting up like mushrooms after rain. The era of jazz and closed aristocratic clubs is dead. The era of rock and roll, plastic, and mass consumption has arrived, and amid this new, noisy, democratic world, the Cheekwood estate looks like a whale washed ashore. It's still magnificent. The limestone is still as strong. The gardens laid out by Mabel have come into full force. Yet functionally, the house is dead. For Huldah Cheek Sharp and her husband Walter, life in this palace has turned into a logistical nightmare. Here we encounter a crisis that has killed more great estates than any fires or floods. This is practicality's crisis. In the 1950s, the professional servants class ready to live in the owner's house for pennies disappeared. To maintain Cheekwood in the condition envisioned by Leslie Cheek required an army, yet the army was no longer there. There were only astronomical bills for heating a space that's impossible to heat, and property taxes that grew along with the city's expansion. The house turned into a white elephant, a sacred precious asset that ruins its owner. Huldah Sharp found herself trapped. She lived inside the monument to her father's ambitions. Yet this monument was incompatible with the 20th century's reality. At this moment, a collision of two problems occurs, giving birth to a historic decision. On one side, the Sharp family owning a perfect building without a purpose. On the other side, a group of Nashville civic activists who had a purpose but no building. The Nashville Museum of Art was dragging out a miserable existence. It had no permanent home. Collections were gathering dust in basements. The city needed a cultural center, a botanical garden, a place for the public. Investors were looking for land. The Sharps were looking for a way out. In 1957, Huldah Cheek Sharp commits an act that completely overturns her father's philosophy. Leslie Cheek spent a fortune to build a fortress separating his family from society. Huldah decides to tear down these walls. She offers to donate Cheekwood, the house, the land, the gardens, and the buildings, to the public. This wasn't a simple decision. It was capital's transformation from private to public. It was the end of Leslie Cheek's dynastic dream of a family nest, yet the beginning of something much more enduring. The deal was complex. It wasn't just handing over the keys. It required creating a new structure, finding funding to convert a residential house into a museum. A fundraising campaign was launched, the goal to raise $500,000, about $5 million in today's money, to create an endowment fund for the future museum. The situation's irony is off the charts. Money earned on history's most mass product, coffee for ordinary people, was spent on an elite palace, which now a generation later was returning back to ordinary people in a park and museum's form. The circle closed. The transformation process of the building, which began at the 1950s end, was a surgical intervention in the house's body. Architects and engineers entered the Holy of Holies. The bedrooms where the coffee empire's heirs slept were gutted and turned into galleries. The garage where luxurious Packards and Cadillacs stood became a reception for visitors. The family's personal belongings were packed and removed. Yet the most important change occurred on the psychological level. The house ceased being an introvert. If previously the windows were curtained to hide private life, now they had to let in light for the paintings. If previously the gates were closed to let no one in, Now the main task became attracting traffic. On May 22, 1960, Cheekwood's gates opened. Thousands of people came to the opening ceremony. Those very Nashville residents whose parents and grandparents once looked at the hill construction as unattainable rich people's whim now entered inside as full-fledged guests. This was a truth moment for wealth's very idea. Leslie Cheek thought that wealth is possession. Huldah proved that wealth's highest form is the ability to give. However, inside this beautiful altruism story hides harsh pragmatism. Donating the house to the museum was the only way to save it from destruction. If Huldah had tried selling it as a private home, it would most likely have faced the fate of hundreds of other Gilded Age estates: demolition, land division into plots, and cottage development. No one in their right mind in the 1960s would buy such a house to live in. There simply was no market for such objects. By turning the house into an institution, the Cheek family made their last and perhaps most brilliant business move. They exchanged real estate that was falling in price for a legacy that only increases in value. The Cheekwood name ceased being associated with private money and became a synonym for Tennessee state's culture. Yet, let's go inside the opened museum in 1960. Visitors walked on the same marble floors as Leslie. They looked into the same giant mirror, yet the context changed. The mirror no longer reflected the owner, it reflected the crowd. Art objects, English panels, fireplaces, staircases lost their function as life's stage sets and became exhibits. The staircase created for the hostess of the ball to descend now served as a tourist attraction. There's certain tragedy in this. The house survived, yet its soul changed. It became colder. The coffee smell in mornings disappeared. The voices of arguing people disappeared. Only the tour guide's voice and sign saying, "Do not touch," remained. The transformation, however, went beyond the house's walls. The landscape created by Bryant Fleming and Mabel Cheek received new life. The gardens, which previously only selected guests saw, became public property. And here, Fleming's planning genius was revealed. He created landscapes on such a scale that they easily withstood the transition from privacy to publicity. Tennessee Hills views framed by wrought iron grills became accessible to anyone who could pay the entrance fee. The 1950s crisis was overcome through a radical rejection of selfishness. This is a rare case in American dynasty's history. The Vanderbilts watched their Fifth Avenue mansions being demolished. The Astors lost their palaces. The Cheeks preserved theirs by renouncing rights to it. At this moment, the story seems to end with a happy ending. The museum is open, the legacy is saved. The people are pleased, yet a documentarian must look deeper. What do we really see when we look at Cheekwood today? We see a monument to an era that will never return. We see the physical embodiment of that brief historical moment when coffee could build a Versailles, and we see how America digested its aristocrats. It didn't cut off their heads as in France. It did something more sophisticated to them. It turned their sanctuaries into amusement parks for the middle class. Today, the Cheekwood estate is visited by more than 400,000 people annually. In spring, 100,000 tulips bloom here, creating a carpet worthy of Dutch kings. In autumn, pumpkin festivals are held. It's one of Tennessee's most photographed places, an ideal backdrop for weddings and selfies. Yet behind this glossy picture hides our story's last, most cruel irony. Go into any American supermarket today. find the grocery aisle. Somewhere on the lower or middle shelf, you'll see a blue can of Maxwell House coffee. Today, it's a budget brand. People buy it, not for a gourmet experience, but for a quick caffeine dose. It's a mass product belonging to a giant transnational corporation. The Cheek family name has long been erased from the labels. The business that Leslie Cheek considered his power's foundation has dissolved into the faceless ocean of global capital. And now, look at the house. That very object built as a whim, as a golden cage, as a place to store the mirror, has endured. Leslie Cheek bet on business and considered the house a decoration. History turned everything upside down. His serious business disappeared, and his decoration became the only anchor holding his name in eternity. This is a lesson that sounds frighteningly relevant for our time. Today's tech billionaires are building their bunkers in New Zealand, launching rockets to Mars, and trying to hack aging's code. They, just like Leslie Cheek 100 years ago, are trying to convert bank account numbers into physical immortality. They're building walls to fence themselves off from the world's chaos. Yet Cheekwood's story teaches us something else. Approach that very mirror in the main hall. It's still there. The glass has become slightly cloudy. The gilding has dulled, yet it stands in its place. This mirror is a mute witness to triumph and collapse. It saw Leslie Cheek adjusting his tie, feeling like the universe's master. It reflected his coffin when all the world's money couldn't make his heart beat again. It saw Mabel's loneliness, and now it sees your faces. True ownership is an illusion. We don't own houses, land, or art. We're just temporary custodians. We guard things for those who will come after us. Leslie Cheek dreamed of building a fortress into which no one could enter without an invitation. Yet his legacy lives on only because now its gates are open to everyone.